Welcome to Law Excellence Hindu News Analysis. Today we are going to cover these four topics that are appeared in the Hindu newspaper. Before moving to the first article, just pause the video and try to answer this question. Now this question says that Narcotics Control Bureau comes under which ministry? A. Minister of Home Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Minister of Defense, or Minister of Health and Family Welfare. Now UPSC has a habit of asking about ministries and statutory bodies. In that respect, this question is important. Try to answer by yourself. Now coming to the first article of the day. Now this article is saying that India voices dissent against trade barriers linked to the emissions. Now the context of the news is that now recently COP29 happening in Azerbaijan capital Baku. Now in this conference, certain countries, especially the Western and European countries, arguing that there is a need of linking the trade to the greenhouse gas emissions so that the trade will also have a less carbon footprint. Now, this is what the context of the news. Now, the developing countries, especially emerging economies, here such as basic means Brazil, South Africa, India, and China. These countries are arguing that these kind of measures are called as protectionist measures. These are against the developing economy because industrialized economy are already industrialized. They have all the technology and money that is required. But developing economies are presently developing in nature, so they need a lot of industrialization need to be happen. So present industrialization in these developing countries are based on the conventional energy sources such as coal, petroleum, etc. Now these kind of industries are very energy intensive, hence these kind of measures are against the developing economies and these are act as a protectionist measures. Now this is what the article is saying. Now in this context of the news, you have to know certain things, that is CBAM. CBAM means Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Now this is one way of mechanism that links the trade and global greenhouse gases. Now this is a mechanism of European Union which says that the imports and exports has to be compliant to the greenhouse gas emission norms so that there is less carbon footprint and less anthropogenic emissions in the process of economic development across the countries. Now this is what the mechanism. Now this mechanism is in the European Union. Now you have to know what this CBAM means. Why? Because if you see previous year questions, it was asking about something related to the environment and sustainability. Now see this question of 2022 prelims. Which one of the following best describes the term greenwashing? Now, the options are conveying a false impression that a company's products are eco-friendly and environmentally sound. Now, actually, this is what the answer is. Now, in this context, there are certain terms you have to know from the examination perspective. We will discuss that, and not only that, what are the concerns raised by the India and developing countries, especially against this CBM? And what are the arguments of this European and developed economies regarding the CBM? Now we will discuss this. Now before going to discuss that, just remember this prelims fact, that is Fit for 55 in 2030 package. Now this is what the strategy that was adopted by the European Union as a climate policy, under which it want to reduce 55% of the greenhouse gases by 2030 as per the 1991 levels. Now UPSC has a habit of, recently this was seen in the news, it is related to which of the following. When it has like Fit for 55 seen in the news, it is related to which of the following. You have to know that it is related to the European Union and it's something related to the climate policy. Now just remember this thing also. Now we will study what are the arguments for the CBAM and what are the arguments against the CBAM. Now if you see here, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Now, for example, if any import is coming into the European Union, if that imported product is carbon intensive, now they impose certain amount of carbon tax on that. Now this reduces the competitiveness of the product. Now this incentivize the carbon intensive product so that it promotes the countries to go for sustainability. That is what the purpose of this strategy. Now if strategy is followed, now this argument is that it's saying it will reduce the global greenhouse gases overall across the countries. Now this is what the argument. Next, it prevent carbon leakage. Now carbon leakage as a term, it is important from the examination perspective. Now certain companies, especially corporates, shifting their economic basis or registering their companies in the countries which have weaker environmental legislations. Okay, weaker environmental legislations. Why? because if there are products are carbon intensive, have more carbon footprint or releasing more greenhouse gases from their services or products, they will be imposed a certain amount of carbon tax. Now their products are less competitive, right? Their products prices will increase, hence their business will be reduced, their profits will be reduced. That's why they are moving to the less or weaker environmental legislation countries. Now, when this mechanism is imposed, now imports will be everywhere imposing the carbon tax, right? If any import is about carbon intensive, there will be carbon tax everywhere. Now, cannot companies change their places? Now, next important benefit is carbon tax revenue used to support EU climate policies. Now, under this mechanism, it is said that the revenue that is generated under this carbon tax in the European Union, this can be used for the EU climate policies. What is the EU climate policy? It has a target that net zero by 2050. Now, this is what one of the target. Now, this is saying that the revenue generated can be useful for tackling and mitigation of climate change. Now, what are the concerns raised by the India? Now, it is saying that it impact India's exports. Why? The majority of the exports into the European Union by India is iron, steel, and aluminium. Now, these are very carbon intensive, right? Now, definitely this will be uncompetitive for India. Now, not only that, the India's development process is carbon intensity. For example, if you see the present coal-based thermal energy or electricity generated in India, it is majorly 64% of the coal, right? Now, global average, if you see energy generation, it is coal is based on 36% only, and European Union it is around only using 15% of its energy mix from the coal. Now, in this way, India has disadvantage in terms of trade, especially export import. Now, this is what saying. Now, another important challenge or concern is the risk to export competitiveness in the overall products. Now, saying that these type of mechanisms will have a spillover effect on other exports from India. See, it is saying that in the top 20 exports from India constitutes refined petroleum, organic chemicals, textiles, pharma medicaments, etc. Now, all these are involves the greenhouse gas emissions and conventional energy sources. Now, it is inevitable that these products and services will attract the carbon tax, and this will be uncompetitive. Hence, this product price will increase, and hence India's exports will reduce. In this way, it is impacting India. Now, these are the concerns you have to remember from the both prelims and mains perspective. Now, coming to the next article. Now, this article is saying that India needs a globally recognized public policy school. What is the context of the news? Now, the context of the news is saying that in Western countries, especially USA, there are strong public policy institutes. For example, there is a Harvard Kennedy School in USA. There is London School of Economics in the European Union. Now, these public policy institutes are helping in design and implementation of the government policies in those countries. But this article is saying that in India, there are public policy institutions, but they are not very effective or very strong to a level of influencing the decision making in India. Now, this is what the context of the article. Now, others said that there are certain challenges that are faced by the in India civil society, especially public policy institutions, etc. And there are certain suggestions that are given by this article. Now we will discuss those things. Now, why this question is important or this article is important. Now, if we see GS paper 2 clearly mentioned that in syllabus, government policies and interventions for the development in various sectors and issues arising out of the design and implementation. Yes, civil society plays a crucial role in policy inputs and implementation, right? Such as NGOs, etc. Now, in that way, this is relevant. Any points that are discussed here, you can add in your answers in the GS paper 2. Now, next, development process and development industry. Now, not only in policy implementation, the overall process of development, there are civil societies participating in India, such as NGOs, SHGs, donor institutions, etc. Now, from this perspective, this article is very important. Now, we'll discuss what the author said. Now, the author of the article saying that there are challenges faced by the public policy institutes in civil societies, mainly because in India, the social and political landscape is very unique. Why it is said unique? Because the decisions are not completely objective. For example, let's say we are often hearing that we are voting based on our caste, based on our religion, based on our ethnicity. And not only that, within the caste, there are people divided into different groups, into different factions. Now, within the family also, we have seen in many instances in Maharashtra politics also, families are divided between the political lines. Hence, there is a unique and social political landscape where decisions are not completely rational or data based. There are many things that are involved, and this is very unique for India. Hence, public policy institutes cannot cater to all those things, right? That is what one of the challenge. Now, other important challenge is that dependency and nexus. Now, why it is said like that? Because the many civil society institutions such as media, NGOs, political parties. Now, all these are having their own agenda. They cannot work independently. They have to follow certain structure or orders from the top. For example, if you see, media is dependent upon the funding, especially the corporatization. So they cannot completely neutral. Likewise, NGOs, we are often hearing the issues of FCRA, political funding. Right? In political parties, we know that there is no independent opinion in the political parties. Party has such as to comply to the one such ideology or demand. Like that, there is a dependency and nexus between the institutions. Hence, cannot we cannot see that independent decision making. Next, there is gap between politics and policy. We often see that there is continuous politicization of issues in India. For example, religious issues, caste issues. There is a demand of caste survey, religion in the politics, and all those things. And many people saying that before elections there may be politics, but after elections there should be focus only on policy. But in India, it is seen that before and after elections there is involvement of politics, and there are identity politics also. So the demand is there is a need of policy based debates and politics, not identity based, right? That's why there is a gap between politics and policy. The focus is more on identities, garnering votes, creating vote bank, but not on the policies. That's why we often miss the quality debates in the political rivals. Now, next important thing is that democratic institutions, not democratic values. The author mentioned that in India there are many democratic institutions such as judiciary, executive, legislature, medias, NGOs, civil societies. All these are the democratic institutions, but they do not function with democratic values. Not only that, even people in their real life cannot adhere to the democratic values. Now, how can it seen? Now, in real life, we have seen that many instances of corruption, police brutalities, not following traffic rules, and all these are against the institutional values of democracy. Now, hence, in this context, public policy institutes cannot cater completely only on the data theoretically. They have to know the ground realities. That is what the author is saying. Next, parochial factors. What does it mean? It is being said that even in the legislature at parliamentary level and political parties, there is no quality debates. No, a single leader can command everyone. There is no individual opinion. For example, if there is any policy, there is debates happening in the parliament. There is a whip concept, right? No single MP cannot go against that. No such kind of things will avoid the quality debates. Now, another important thing is decision making. The power is concentrated in the few hands. No one NGO cannot dictate the decision making or public policy institute. That's why we often see that we don't remember many public policy institutes names in India because their suggestions and reference are just recommendatory in nature. They cannot influence the policy making because in India policy making majorly concentrated in the hands of few people who can get influence the people. Now, next important thing is opportunism. What is meant by this opportunism? Because we have often seen that many institutes or even bureaucrats often linked or aligned to the one political party. For example, we often seen that allegations that this channel or media channel is aligned to this political party. These officers are more favorable in this political party. Things like that. So there is no independent functioning of certain independent democratic institutions. Now these are what the challenges that are said by the author in this article. Now author also said about certain suggestions in this article. Now, author said that there is a need of policy education, especially both to the leaders and the people. People should know about populism and developmental factors and need of empathy towards the people. Now, there is a thing called politics of poverty. That is, now we often hear that we need to be trained how to fish, not to give fish. Right? We need to focus on the capacity building of the people, not just giving that blind doles. Now that is what the author is saying. Next, structural reforms, especially there is a need of inner party democracy in the political parties, and there is strong neutrality between the civil society and political parties. Now that is what the author is saying. Now next, ear to the ground strategy. Now, most of the public policy institutes should not solely be dependent on the data at the theoretical level. They should link themselves to the ground realities, especially by interacting with the local people. Next important thing is training in the local factors, especially the leaders and public policy institute should train as per the local needs. Because in India, the political factors and social factors, cultural factors, a lot influence the decisions taken by the authorities. Hence, public policy institutes should cater to these instances rather theoretically going for the suggestions. Now, following these things, the author said that will strengthen the public policy institutes in India. Now, this article is relevant to the GS paper 2, right? Now, based on our discussion, try and answer this question. What are the challenges in India's public policy design and implementation? Suggest some measures to overcome this. Try answer this question, okay? Now, coming to the next article. This article is saying jungles drenched in red. Now, this article is about Naxalism. Now, recently, one of the biggest encounter was happened in the Chhattisgarh, in which 31 Naxal people died. Now, if you see these images, these are the images of the died Naxals, and they are gunned down by the police and army. Now, this is said that it is biggest in Naxal operation in the recent times. Now, the context of the news is that recently Union Home Minister Amit Shah said that Naxalism is breathing its last breath. Now, he also said that Naxalism will end in the state of Chhattisgarh by March 2026. Now, on what basis he said? Because recently in the last 10 years, because of the continuous encounters and Naxalism, anti-Naxalism operations, the instance of killing of Jawans and civilians were reduced. And it is said that around 80 to 90% of casualties of Jawans and civilians were reduced in the last 10 years compared to the previous decades. Now, number of districts affected by the Naxalism also reduced from 120 to 38 as per this article. Now, this article is saying that government also taking priority-based steps, especially in providing social development in these Naxal-affected areas, especially providing roads, connectivity, communication. Especially this article mentioned about Jal Jeevan Mission being able to transfer to the people drinking water in the Naxal-affected areas. Now, this article also mentioned that a caution, that is, military success or killing of Naxals does not end Naxalism as an ideology, because Naxalism root cause is exploitation, oppression of the land laws. So, the need of the hour is social development to holistically eliminate the Naxalism. Now, that is what the author is saying. Now, in this context, we use this context to explain the Naxalism causes and what are the measures taken by the government. Now, this article is important from the GS paper 3 perspective, internal security. There are previously questions asked in GS paper 3 about the Naxalism continuously. Now, we will discuss from the mains perspective. Now, the major reasons is about socio-economic factors. What does it mean? Now, people in the tribal and Dalit areas are majorly facing the poverty, especially as per the economic survey. It has been said that the tribal people facing poverty of around 50%. The national average of poverty is around 21%. Now, this indicating that they are facing the issues of unemployment, lack of livelihood. Now, in this context, people involved in the Naxals are using this context, giving some money or employment, appearing them as a saviors. Now, this lead to Naxalite ideology appealing to the people. Now, next important issue is that land rights. As you know, majority of the tribal people live in the forest areas. Now, forest areas are facing the issues of mining, developmental activities, deforestation. Now, in this context, people are displaced at a large level, especially tribal people. As you know that 40 to 50% of the displaced people are majorly tribal people. Now, they are ended up as a bonded labor in the urban areas or in the same mining areas. Now, in this context, again, these Naxals leaders projecting themselves as the champions of marginalized people and resolving their disputes. Hence, in this way, they are attracted to the Naxalism as an ideology and their leadership. Next, caste discrimination. Now, majority of the, again, people involved in the Naxals other than the tribals are Dalits because of the caste discrimination, lack of social identity, social exclusion, and marginalization from the mainstream society. Now, all these are the social factors. Another important factor that attracting the youth and women is unemployment. as they are majorly not educated because of the lack of infrastructures like education institutions, schools, etc. They are facing the issue of unemployment. Hence, Naxalism as an ideology appealing to the youth especially. Now, next, other important factors are involved are weak governance. Why weak governance? Because Naxal affected areas are having a deficit of political leadership. Now, when there is a deficit of political leadership, there is less interference from the government. Hence, in this context, Naxal people will establish parallel governance structures, and often they also dispense the justice also. They impose some tax and they control the people involved there. So they also use mechanism of collapsing the government infrastructure, boycotting the elections. Now, in this context, they lack the basic infrastructure. For example, roads. Now, when there is lack of roads, what happened? There is lack of connectivity with the mainstream society. Next, when there is lack of communication or towers, they don't know what is happening in the mainstream society, especially about the welfare programs that government is implementing. Now, in this context, they promote false narrative and propaganda against the government that government is not doing anything. In fact, rather government is torturing us, want to displace us. Now these are the false propagandas that they are promoting and brainwashing in the people. Now this create disillusionment with democracy. Now the idea or propaganda promoting here was that democracy consists of majority of the few people with holding power and they are the elites. Now, they also often see and reinforce this idea by there are certain government officials who are exploiting these tribal people. Now, this idea of Naxalism and Maoism will reinforce by these kind of instances. Now, another issue is political issue is confusion. Confusion about what? It is about social issue or security threat. Now, many people think that whether Naxalism is a security threat or social issue. Now, this article also mentioned that just because of encountering some Naxals, you are addressing the issue of physical security, but not actually addressing the social issue because Naxalism is rooted in the social development. Next, issue of globalization. This issue of globalization. Why? Because of globalization, there is businesses value chain that are spread across the country. Since there is need of pressure of more land. Now, in this context, due to corporatization, businesses taking the forest. Now, this is against the ideology of Maoism itself. Now, another important challenge is they are operating in the remote and inaccessible areas. This is very difficult for the police or army forces to base their camps. And Naxals easily hide because they are very aware of the region's terrain. Now, other important challenges are lack of intelligence, especially people have loyalty toward the Naxals. They don't share information with the police officers. Right now, what are the measures taken by the government? Now we have the policy that national policy and action plan to address the left-wing extremism since 2014-15. Now this is a policy that have a vision and a mission to direct the activities of the government and the executive towards anti-Naxal activities. Now as a comprehensive strategy, we have Samadhan. Now what does mean by Samadhan? Samadhan involves first S means smart leadership. What does it mean? Developing institutions, especially providing political leadership by conducting panchayat elections in the Naxal affected areas. No, conducting regular elections is very important because if there is gap of political leadership, Naxals will take the charge and dispense the justice and project them as their own leaders. Now, in that respect, this is very important. And next important thing is aggressive action. Now, if there is any information about Naxal ambush or activities, police forces and central government forces will also take aggressive action to combat them and counter and eradicate those forces. And next important thing is motivation and capacity building. Why the tribal youth are mostly vulnerable to the attracting of ideology of Naxalism. Hence, government have many programs in which there is capacity building to the youth. Especially, we have seen residential schools and colleges established in tribal areas. Now, this is what to channel that energy and direct them towards education and employment. Now, this involves motivation. Now, next important thing is actionable intelligence. Government should work with coordination and cooperation with all the agencies involved in controlling the internal security to tackle these Naxal affected problems. Now, next important thing is dashboard D. Dashboard based monitoring results. So what does it mean? Now it creates certain standards for countering the Naxalism. For example, social economic indicators such as providing health, education, skilling. Now, all these are the indicators that measure the social development in the areas. Now, this dashboard also includes like how many Maoists are gunned down, how many districts are affected. Now, in this way, every factor is analyzed and considered to assess whether Naxalism is controlled or not. And next important thing is that harnessing technology. What does it mean? Now, recently it has been said that drones are provided especially to monitor the dense forest areas for the range of around 25 kilometers. Now, this is also mentioned in this news article also. Now, in this way, technology used bomb detection technology. Why? Because many a times Naxals are involved in the creation of ambush in which many police individuals have died. No, these are the strategies that are taken. Now, other important final one is Samadhan N, no access for finance. What does it mean? Now, Naxals required a lot of material, especially for making the arms and ammunitions, for changing these areas, food supplies. So, they want to choke this finance source. Now, this is what the important strategy. Now, other important schemes that are taken was aspirational district programs. Now, under this program, especially the Naxal affected districts are identified, especially where there is the socio-economic indicators are lacking. Those districts are identified and provided all the necessary basic infrastructure that are needed for the public that helps in delivering the public services. Next important thing is security related in expenditure that may be related to the compensation to the Jawans and civilians that are killed in the process, or that can be involved in the development of fortified police stations. No, other important thing is that surrender policies. Right, surrender policies involves providing employment, capacity building in return for certain kind of information, especially to the former Naxalists. And next important thing is carrying rewards on the heads of the Maoists. Now, these are the strategies that are taken, and now some other strategies that are taken by the government, especially at the operational level, is developing dedicated forces. For example, if you see Greyhounds is one such strategy to counter the Naxalism that is very much popular in Andhra Pradesh. Now, other important measures, joint and coordinated actions, especially between AP, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha. So, there is interstate cooperation. Now, next, Jungle Warfare Training Center in Kanker. Now, especially Naxalites are mostly concentrated in the areas of forests and hills. Now, especially designed warfare mechanism in which forces are trained in a jungle warfare kind of an environment. Next, dedicated local recruits and surrendered forces. Now, people who are surrendered and the local youth which are living in these Naxal affected areas are recruited into the special forces because they are very much aware of the existing places on the Naxal affected regions, especially in these complex terrain regions of forest. Now, these are the measures taken by the government. Now, the last article of the day. Now, context of the news is that 700 kg meat seized off Gujarat coast and 8 arrested by the NCB. The news is saying that recently a joint and coordinated operation under the Operation Sagar Manthan by the Gujarat Anti-Terrorist Squad, Indian Navy and NCB, all three coordinatedly arrested few people who are transporting this narcotics. Now, this news is important, especially from the prelims perspective. Why? Because UPSC has a habit of asking about statutory bodies. Now, you have to know certain things about the NCB and the drug mentioned in the news. Because UPSC may ask that these drugs sometimes mentioned in the news, what it is related to. Now, things like that. Now, see, Narcotics Control Bureau. Now, it's a statutory body established under the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act 1985. See, UPSC previously asked that where is this tea development or coffee development board is headquartered. Now, things like that may ask again. Now, NCB headquartered is in Delhi. Now, this NCB has under the Ministry of Home Affairs because UPSC sometimes asks about ministries also. Now, the drug mentioned in this article is about methamphetamine. Now, remember this name of the drug. Now, there is an operation mentioned in this article, that is Operation Sagar Manthan. Now, UPSC may ask that Operation Sagar Manthan is related to which of the following? It is related to the Narcotics Control Bureau to counter maritime narcotic terrorism. Right. The other important thing mentioned in this news is Nasha Mukt Bharat. Now, this is a scheme under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Now, you have to remember these things. UPSC has asked previously about this scheme. Now, what are the international level measures taken by the India to combat this narcotic terrorism. Especially India is sandwiched between the two drug regions, that is Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle. You know that, right? Now, India signed this Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs 1961, Convention of Psychotropic Substances 1971, and UN Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances 1988. Keep these facts in mind from the prelims perspective. Thank you. Have a nice day.